So, hello everyone, I'm Patrick Johnson, and I am the Military Adaptive Sports Program, known as MASP, site coordinator here at Walter Reed Hospital in beautiful Bethesda, Maryland. I'm excited to have those of you on from all over the country as we're doing this virtual thing and trying to stay connected with folks all around. I know we have some soldiers, some Marines, some sailors, and some airmen from all over the country on. Some of you will be watching this after the fact, so feel free to reach out to myself, our LJ Eve, who's in San Diego, our Brad Bowen, who's in San Antonio, and we will help you find what you need. We're really excited today for our coffee chat today, which this month is focusing on resiliency. And today we have a wonderful part of our beautiful Magellan team, who is also one of my teammates with Coach Army, and that is Heather, who is going to be leading today's session. I'm going to let her take over now. She's going to run the session. If you have questions throughout it, feel free to jump in and do the chat thing, and I will try to get those to Heather. And other than that, we will go about 30, 45 minutes. If you have to drop off at any time, I'll see you on the flip side, but everybody have a healthy Tuesday, and let's get started. I'll turn the table over to Heather. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Patrick. Good afternoon, everyone. I think most of us are tuning in from places where it is the afternoon. For me, it's still in the morning. So just like Patrick said, my name's Heather Leggett, and I work for the Army's Ready and Resilient program. So essentially what we focus on is readiness, and a lot of that stems in performance psychology and sports psychology research. And that's really what my background is in. So I did my education at John F. Kennedy University, got my master's in sports psychology, have worked with a variety of different teams and athletes. And the program that I work for now, I've been with for 6 years. So I absolutely love being able to support the Army family and just military personnel in general. It's a population I respect so highly. So I feel fortunate to do the work that I do. And I thank all of you for your service in whatever capacity that has been. And so, yeah, so that's part of what I do. The other half of what we do is resilience training, and that is founded in positive psychology. Before we dive into what we're going to discuss today, I know Patrick, LJ introduced himself, we chatted a bit. Mike, I actually think I recognize you from Warrior Games in previous years. Yeah, awesome. So I've done some work in the mental performance coaching side at Army Trials and Warrior Games. Have absolutely loved that experience. So Mike, I know who you are. I think we've got a couple other people on the line. If you wouldn't mind just introducing yourselves and just tell us a little bit about yourself, maybe what your role within MASP is, that would be great. And then we'll get started.
All right, Kelly, why don't you go next, please? If you can.
Me, Kelly?
Yes, I'm sorry, Kelly Fisher.
Okay. Hi there, I'm Kelly Fisher. I also work with MASP. I am the Marine Corps site coordinator / service lead. So we work at headquarters Quantico. And I have had the lovely privilege of working with all of these amazing team members and meeting RSMs and wonderful providers like yourself. I'm very much looking forward to this session. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Happy to have you. Welcome.
Thanks.
Thank you, Kelly. I'll just introduce Roger. Roger's actually recording probably 2 or 3 sessions right now. Roger is our amazing product specialist with MAS. He is taking with Stratcom taking all these and recording them and putting them together. So I know we have 2 or 3 things going on at once. So Roger's probably jumping back and forth between laptops. So that's Roger Wallenberg. Thank you, Roger, for what you do. And I know LJE, our San Diego site coordinator, he's also on another session right now, which is amazing technology that we have 3 things going on at once. So I think that's everyone who is in the room right now. I see Greg Quarles just jumped in. So I will, Greg, why don't you give a quick introduction to just tell us where you are, and we're just saying hello.
I'm Greg Quarles. I'm actually on the road driving from South Carolina down to Columbus, Georgia, so that's why I'm a little late. Because I just figured out how to hook this up to my phone. So
Awesome. Well, thank you, Greg. Well, we will let you not have to talk or press buttons anymore, so you can focus on the road, and you're going to get to listen to Heather. She's going to be the lead, and so we'll get going.
All right.
All right, sounds great.
Yeah, so thanks everyone for introducing yourselves. For this session, it's really beneficial to have collaboration, answering questions if you're able to and you're comfortable doing so. And the beauty of this is with a smaller group, I think it really facilitates and fosters better discussion. So let's dive straight into it. So I said that my background was in sport and performance psychology. And before we get into that, I want us to think about optimal performance as a puzzle. So if we could share that first slide, that would be beneficial here. And so I want to start with this question. So if you think of performing well and being at your best, if that were a puzzle, what pieces would be included in that puzzle? And I am looking to hear some responses here. What ideas do you have?
Equipment.
Yeah, okay. So having proper equipment goes into performing optimally, sure. What else?
A sleep
Mental
plan.
focus.
Mental focus. I think I heard sleep in there. Absolutely. Anything else come to mind?
Proper diet and training.
Yeah, diet, training, nutrition. Someone said proper focus, right? So thinking of along those lines, we're really tapping into that mental component of performance. And that's really what my field is all about. So how do we optimize the way that your brain works in order to perform better more consistently? So I liked that visual of a puzzle because it helps people to see, hey, we're just that mental puzzle piece, that mental component that allows you to perform at your best. If you're missing that piece or that piece isn't as refined as you would like it to be, sure, you still may perform well, right? And may still achieve success, but are you as successful as you could be? Are you reaching that full potential as you would if you harnessed the mental component? So that's what we're talking about there. So if we progress on to the next slide, if we could. And I want us to think about this for a moment. So what percentage, we hear people make this argument all the time of performance being physical, mental. What would you say the percentages are of mental versus physical in terms of performing at your best? Are we talking 50-50?
I think for me, like 75-25, because even if I'm kind of in a messy place in my head, if I'm conditioned and ready and the equipment's working, I can still pull it off because
yeah. So. Okay. So 75% mental, you're saying, 25.
I think 75% physical for me.
Got it. 25.
Yeah. Because I can, I feel like I faked it many games and rowing races where I was just checked out and I just went through the motion.
Okay. And but you had that physical training and preparation, so you really leveraged that in terms of your performance. Yeah, makes sense. Let's hear some other thoughts.
I think it all depends on what sport it is.
Right.
Whether it's more of a physical sport or a mental sport. Like if you go into like air rifle, air pistol, or archery, that's a really mental. Even though it's physical, but you got to be mentally focused on that one. So I think the numbers are higher on the mental side than it would be for, say, rowing or powerlifting or something like that, where it's more physical than it would be mental, like Coach was saying.
Yeah. Okay. So the sport that you're doing could certainly play a role. Some sports, it's pretty well known that it's more mental than other sports, perhaps. Yeah, great point. Any other thoughts here? What percentages we're looking at? So it depends. It varies. We've got 75-25. Okay. So with that, I mean, what it sounds like, and there's really no right number here. I wish I could tell you like definitively, I know, and that research says it's 90-10 or something like that. We don't know specifically, right? And I think it's such a great point that it does depend on the sport, what the demands you face are. So it depends on a lot of different factors. But the point we're trying to get after here is that no matter what percentage you give to mental versus physical, you're acknowledging that performing well being at your best is to some capacity mental, right? Doesn't matter what percentage it is, even if it's 10%, why don't we take that 10%, maximize that, perform, or make sure we're training our brain to therefore optimize our performance. So we know that the mental component has an impact on how we do physically. There's this connection between our brain and our bodies, right? So our brain tells our bodies what to do, how to operate. Of course, the more that we practice something, a lot of our behaviors can become automated. But sometimes we can get into habits or patterns of thoughts and behavior that are counterproductive for us. So in order to be at our best more regularly, we want to build an awareness of the way that we're thinking, how that impacts ourselves physically, so that way we can more deliberately think in a way that leads to better performance outcomes and better performances more often. That's really the goal of what we're talking about today with the brain-body connection. So being that you all acknowledge that there is a mental component to performance, let's talk about that for a little bit. So how does the mental side impact how well you perform? What do you think? And this could be a specific example that you've had, more general thoughts.
I'll just start by saying it's funny as you were speaking on that, as Greg mentioned, I thought, you know what, for rowing, if you're in a big boat, then it's like 75% physical for me. But if I'm in a single, it's about 75% mental, because you are having it. So it really does depend on what your role is. So even within different sports, what your position is. Like, are you playing a goalie, for soccer, where a lot of that needs to be more mental than the physical. And like for rowing in a single, an example of Worlds 3 years ago, where the #1 ranked single sculler was a U.S. Young man, and he clipped a buoy in the heats and flipped. And so because his mental wasn't exactly to keep him middle length, it didn't matter that he was, the best physical specimen out there. And so, I think that definitely made me think about that. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, I challenge you to think about times where, and when I say performances, this could be an array of things. This could be athletic performance, which oftentimes we're focusing on, especially in groups like these, but this could also be work performance. This could be having to have an important conversation with a significant other or a friend. This could be participating in virtual training. A lot of different responsibilities that we have, we can consider those performances. Just thinking in these lines, right? Athletic performance as well. I think we can all think of times in our lives where the way that we did felt a little bit off, right? And a lot of times the reason for that, sure, it might be lack of physical preparation or training, but if we've got the same amount of physical training, what is it that separates a good performance from a not so great performance? And oftentimes it's that mental piece. I know for myself, if I've been really sleep deprived or stressed, that's going to come into my teaching that I do, and my performance is going to suffer because of that. And that's because in those moments, my brain is taking shortcuts. I'm not thinking as clearly or as productively as I could, and it's impacting my results. So what I want to do now is break down this relationship between our brain, our thoughts, how that impacts what our bodies do, the emotions that we feel, and therefore how that impacts our performances. So if we could progress on to the final slide we have here, we're going to spend quite a bit of time on this slide and really break this principle down. So this is what we refer to as the ATC model, and it's based on work by Albert Ellis. And the very first component here, it's going to build as we go through the slide, is what we call an activating event. So if we could just click one more time here, populate, there we go. So when we're talking about an activating event, this is a trigger, a challenge or adversity positive event. So all we're talking about here are the events that happen as you go throughout your day, right? Big, small, positive, negative, doesn't matter. It's just, hey, this is what happens to you as you're walking through life. So I like to think of it as, my alarm clock went off this morning. That would be an activating event. I spilled a little bit of coffee on myself, activating event. I had a friend send me a text message who I hadn't heard from in a while, Those are all examples of activating event. It could be something like I found out I was getting a raise or a promotion. So it could be larger in scale or much smaller. Simply just what happens to us, right? So this morning, one of my activating events was I woke up to there being construction being done right outside my apartment window. So it's pretty loud. So that was my activating event. And when we're talking about this portion of the model, we're simply speaking about facts. So this is just the facts, the 4 W's, so the who, what, when, and where of what actually happened. So I'd like to hear from some of you now, what are some activating events that you have experienced? Could be this morning, in the last 24 hours. Let's hear some of those. And if you're not quite sure on what it is, I'll help you kind of parse that out. No stress.
Activating event for me today is I had to get up and drive from Greenville, South Carolina to Columbus, Georgia, and got up to absolutely pouring down rain and road traffic. So
Okay.
Those were 2 big ones for me today.
Okay, so it sounds like you had multiple activating events there too, Greg, right? So maybe you
Yes.
had to make that drive. Experiencing some traffic would be an additional activating event. Having a downpour, ton of rain, so that's another activating event. Yeah, so we want to make sure that we are really breaking down and being very specific about these different events. It'll make a little bit more sense as we work through the model. But if we can say in this specific moment, this is what happened, here's what I thought about it, and here were my emotions and reactions. So, all right, so thank you for sharing that, Greg. Any other activating events from this morning? Okay. Oh, I thought someone was going to chime in, maybe not.
Let's see, back into bed at a regular time, just had a problem with falling asleep. And then because of bad weather, the power goes out, and then the AC goes out, and then your sleep apnea machine also goes out.
Yeah. Okay. So that sounds like, Mike, a series of different activating events, right? And I'm sorry if that was your experience. That does not sound pleasant, nor would that be helpful for our sleep, right? But yeah, a series of different activating events that happened. Okay. So what I want to do now is move to the next part of the model. So with these events, this is simply what happens to us, and our thoughts are interpretations of that activating event. So here's where my brain is doing some work, right? It's taking the information of what's happening in my environment, and it's assessing some sort of value to that, right? I'm interpreting it in some way. So these are those initial thoughts that pop into your mind, your interpretations of that activating event. So what you say to yourself in the heat of the moment. So these are pretty immediate. So for me, with my example of waking up to hearing that construction happening outside, my initial uncensored, unfiltered thought was, you've got to be kidding. So that was my heat of the moment thought in the moment. Okay. Now let's go back to some of the other examples that we had. So Greg, you shared that as you were driving, and I don't necessarily, you can share if you're comfortable. I don't want to distract you from what you're doing. But as you were driving, you experienced a downpour. What was that initial heat of the moment thought as the downpour started to happen? What popped into your head?
The initial thought with the downpour was just like extreme like stress and anxiety because of the weather and being on the road. So that was the initial thing, is just like kind of overtakes your body, and the stress and anxiety and breathing, everything goes up.
Okay. Yeah. And so what you're getting into a little bit too, Greg, is those emotional and physical reactions you had in the moment. And every once in a while, so a couple different points here. So you're not necessarily wrong, of course, right? And I think it's easier sometimes to tune into the emotion that we have and the way that our bodies react. So speaking to that physiology, sometimes that's easier to do in the moment, or when you're reflecting back on how a situation unfolded. Typically, So more often than not, if you slow that process down even further, there's usually a thought that leads to those emotions and reactions. So that comes before the emotions and reactions. Every once in a while. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
I said, well, I guess the thought would be, I'm not going to use them on the over the thing, would probably cuss words, and then those emotions came out.
Okay, gotcha. So the initial, yep. So I appreciate you saying that, and I know that we said we were recording this, so we didn't want to share anything like that. But as you're moving forward with this skill, when we wrap up, I do encourage you to be really real with what your thoughts were, because we're trying to build some self-awareness with this skill. And if we're not being real with ourselves of what the thought we truly had was, we're not building the strongest sense of self-awareness, right? We want to know what thoughts we have and how that impacts how I feel emotionally and my physiological state and my reactions. So yeah, so thank you for that, Greg. So some explicit language there popped into your head, and then you felt anxious or stressed. Yeah, okay. Any others here? So activating event happened. I think we all could say that we've had a shared activating event, and that could be perhaps when we found out that we were going to have to quarantine or shelter in place, depending on where you're located. So when we found that news out, that was a pretty major activating event. What were some different thoughts that came into people's minds?
Anxiety and kind of fear of change.
Yeah. Okay. And so with that anxiety, I would say that's that emotion that you're feeling, right, Patrick? So what would you say the first thought that popped into your mind was?
I remember exactly what it was because I was at the boathouse and our veteran team was supposed to go to San Diego the next week for a race. And the immediate thought was I was sad that we weren't going to get to go race. And then it trickled down to Warrior Games and just really looking at all the work that, you know, my folks had put in and having that not happen,
Yeah.
you know, so.
Yeah. And so you're bringing up a great point too, Patrick, that in response to one activating event, we can have a slew of different thoughts that pop up into our head, right? It's pretty, I mean, it would be very rare. This can sometimes happen if we're ruminating or stuck on a thought, but it's pretty rare to just have one thought on the events that we face. So just like that one, Patrick, you had a bunch of different thoughts. One of them was like, I'm sad we're not going to be able to do that race, and kind of had a trickle down effect on some other thoughts you had in the moment. Yeah. So again, those are those interpretations you have to the different events that we face. And I just realized one point, I'm going to kind of segue back. One point that I forgot to tie back to with Greg's contribution was every once in a while, our brain can do what's called an amygdala hijack. And in those situations, the thought, it's those rare occurrences where the thought does not lead to the emotions and reactions we face. In those moments, the amygdala hijack, it's very high levels of fight or flight. Maybe there's some sort of threat present in our environment. And in those situations, it is the emotion and reaction that you would experience first. So I just want to put that out there. This isn't a 100% of the time model, but it's very often that this is what happens in our brains and bodies. Okay. So those heat of the moment thoughts pop into our head. And again, I've alluded to this relationship. These are going to drive the consequences that we face. So if you could populate that last box on here. So when I say consequences, again, I mean our emotions, so how we feel in that moment, and our reactions. And with reactions, these are a couple different things. So this can either be what you physically do in the moment. Maybe you're taking some sort of action. Maybe you're frozen in place, or it could be physiological. So increased heart rate, perspiration, things like that are also reactions, responses to the thoughts that we have about events. Okay. So for my example, here in that construction this morning, that's my activating event. That first thought I had, you've got to be kidding me. That drove an emotion of irritation in the moment. So I felt irritated, and my reaction was I clenched my jaw and my heart rate went up. So that's an example of that for me. Let's go back to one of the other examples that you all shared. So Patrick, how about we start with yours? You said when you heard about having to shelter in place, your first thought was, oh man, like we're going to miss that upcoming race? What emotion did that drive for you? That thought drive?
It definitely, I was sad, upset, trying to figure out a solution, which denial. I think denial, like, oh, that can't happen. This has to work out. This can't be true. And,
Okay.
We're going to make this work somehow.
Yeah. Yeah. And so that almost sounds like probably a series of additional thoughts that you had in that moment, right? And the reason I challenge us to break it down to the level that we are is because if we're really trying to gain that self-awareness and use that information to optimize our performance, we want to make sure we're being as accurate, as specific as possible. Okay, so in that moment, Patrick, you said you felt sad, or you felt you were in denial emotionally. And then what was your reaction? So what did you either do, right? Like, did something happen in your body? Did you tense up? Maybe shoulders slumped? What was your experience?
Definitely, I kind of got busy. I was like, I'm going to go set up my launch. I was kind of trying to avoid the conversation with the team so I could figure it out, and kind of trying to figure out plan B, which is always from the coaching side. What we have to do is, something doesn't work, how do we get through it? If someone's injured in the game, we keep it going, and realize this was very different from that. For my side, it's not just figure it out, but actually follow the guidance that I'm being given.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. So for you in that moment, your thought, like, I'm bummed we're going to miss this race, or sad about that you felt sad or in denial, and your reaction was you immediately probably stood up and started to go take action to do other things, right?
Right.
Okay.
Definitely.
Yeah. Let's hear from anyone else. So let's walk through. And again, Greg, only if you're comfortable tuning in here, but you said the activating event was that downpour started to happen. What was that first thought you had? Oh yeah.
First thought was it was the WTF,
Right.
which then brought the emotion of kind of like anxiety, anger, like why me? Why does it have to be this bad weather today? Which, going off, being able to utilize some of the training that I've had like this in before, I use the breathing method and the mental imagery to, like, hey, this is something I can't change, but all I can do is breathe, relax myself, and just think of a better, happier place, and drive through it.
Yeah. And so you're getting after, Greg, like, once we know what's happening in the moment, we're able to make some sort of change or modification if we choose to, right? So in the moment,
Yes.
You were feeling a lot of anxiety, and your reaction was you took a deep breath in that moment. And maybe perhaps before the deep breath happened, there could have been some other things going on. Like, I'm not sure if a lot of times when we are anxious, maybe our heart rate increases, something of that nature. But then you were able to very quickly make an adjustment in your thoughts, which therefore led to more ideal or productive reactions for you. So you were able to say to yourself, okay, this isn't beneficial. Let me visualize, take a deep breath. And would you say that led to more productive consequences in your experience?
Yeah, led to a better driving experience. And then, I mean, that bad weather didn't last for that many miles, and now I'm back in the sun. So instead of ruining my whole day and letting that just bring me down, I was able to adapt and overcome that, and continue the mission, which is the drive. And now I'm almost where I'm needing to go, and I'm happy-go-lucky.
Yeah, heck yeah. No, that's awesome. And so really targeting the point that we have a level of control over this model. And looking at this model, where would you say we have, and anyone can answer this, where would you say we have the most control? The A, the T, or the C?
The C.
Okay. So what makes you say the C?
I think, like what Greg just shared, once we have the event and the thoughts, we all know, we're like, okay, I can deal with this one way or the other. And it always seems like we know, hey, I'm going to be cool and collected. But majority of the time for me, I'm just like, nope, I freaked out. And so, but the more I'm aware of it and know, like Greg said, that there is that choice. Like he went back to other sessions like this that have helped me. He goes, okay, I can let this freak out, or I can go to breathing, take that time, count to 5. And I have been trying to do that as a coach more. I'm going to walk away from the referee. I'll walk away from the team, and I'm going to go and come back and then, breathe, and then come back and hopefully be in a better place to present less emotions and reactions and more, controlled emotions and reactions.
Okay, yeah. So they'll still be there, but they're more, like you said, controlled. That was nice language there, right? So like more regulated, or they're expressed more in a way that's going to be helpful in the moment. So you're arguing for consequences here of having the most control. Any other thoughts on where we have the most control in the ATC model? Do we agree? Do we disagree?
I would agree. On the activating event, like we don't have control on that. There might be situations where we do have control on what has caused that activating event, but most of the time we have no control on what caused it or what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
I would say there is a big part of most everything we can do is the consequences. What comes out of it is we can control that. And there's a part of it where we can control our thoughts, and that's why we're working on this type of stuff, to have that mental focus to where we can change those thoughts and put ourselves in the right frame of mind that we need to be, to where we change those thoughts to where we have the happy thoughts, or we have the perfect score thoughts, or the perfect training thoughts to get us to where we need to be for the consequences, which is the final outcome.
Right. Yes. So a lot of great points being made here, and both of you are right to a degree, right? And Patrick, you're absolutely correct that we do have some sort of influence or control over our consequences, the way we feel, what we do in the moment, but this is via our thoughts, right? So if I can change my thoughts to be more productive for me, or reinforce thoughts that are already working for me, we don't necessarily always have to be changing our thinking. Maybe in the moment we have thoughts that are really helping me out. They're serving me in that moment. Great, let's sustain those. Let's keep that thought pattern going, right? But maybe there are those moments like Greg experienced today where his driving could have been impacted if he allowed himself to continue down this path of thinking. So he realized in the moment, he made that adjustment in his thoughts, which drove better, more productive emotions and reactions for him. Okay, so I would argue that we have the most control over our thoughts, but because those thoughts drive our consequences, certainly we have control over both, right? But in order to deliberately have the emotions and reactions we want, we've got to be able to adjust those heat of the moment thoughts or reinforce them accordingly, okay? So thinking of this ATC model, how do you think we can use this to improve your performance or to have more successful performances more often? How can we leverage this ATC model?
Going in whatever sport we're competing in, whether it be rowing or whatever, I'm just going to say for archery, if you have a bad shot and that's your activating event,
Mm-hmm.
once that's gone, you can't change that. And same in rowing or anything. If you make a bad shot or miss a goal, or don't hit the time you need in rowing or whatever it is, those are the activating thoughts. And for us to be able to train our mind to not focus on that and get to the better point, like, hey, that happened, it's in the past. We can't change that. What we can change is what our next shot is, or what our next goal or next block or next time is on rowing. And that's where we have to advance our mental process and our thinking to be able to get to that, so that we have the final consequence that we want.
Yeah, absolutely. Heck, so you're bringing up a great point too, that a lot of times we don't have control over those events that happen to us. And in those performance moments, maybe we had some influence over that happening. Like if I do something, I make a wrong move in whatever sport that I'm playing. Yeah, I may have had control over that happening in the first place, but now that it's happened, what am I going to do now? Am I going to dwell on that? Am I going to ruminate on how that didn't go well? Or am I going to shift my thoughts to what I'm doing in the moment? What adjustment do I need to make right now in order to be successful?
Can I add to what I really love this, having, the athlete and the coach view for it, because this is really me as a coaching side able to look at going, I see how the thoughts process is really, it's like, do you know, like if I'm rowing on the water and I get waked, which means like the boat comes by and it puts water on it, it's like, you know what to do in that situation? You know, to go back to my thought would be, hey team, don't choose to get off your lesson plan and start rowing faster. Choose to do the things that is the same good technique. And like, if you're, are you abandoning that good technique? And I think I think you're right. The consequence is going to be, you're going to get back on track if you go to what's correct and don't. What I see a lot of times with athletes is like, oh, I knew what to do, but something happened and I just freaked out and I totally abandoned everything you told me and I just started just rowing really fast. And we're like, don't do that. And the consequence will be you didn't win, or you didn't do as well as you went because you abandoned your training or the choice in the training to do the proper technique for that sport.
Absolutely. Yeah. So many great points there. So, and a really good example of looking at, hey, here's this activating event, here's the situation, and a couple different choices in how to think. And so one of those choices could be like, oh gosh, like now I'm going to be so behind. I'm not going to be able to catch up. Like, oh, I got to hurry, got to do this. Like, what am I going to do now? So that type of thought process could lead to higher levels of anxiety, stress, worry. And maybe my reaction is I'm getting off my pace, right? I'm moving too fast. I'm making rash decisions that aren't helpful for me, versus having the thought of, okay, take a breath, trust your training. What's the next step, right? Or something of that nature, which would drive more calm, confidence, focus, and a reaction of smoothly executing what you're supposed to be doing. Yeah, so there's so many choices when it comes to performance moments like that, and how we think makes a world of difference. Okay, so yeah, talking about up to this point, we've talked quite a bit about using ATC in the moment to adjust our thoughts, have more productive thoughts, and therefore more productive consequences. When else or how else could we use this ATC model?
Every day.
So in what context, Patrick? What are we thinking?
Family, friends. I'm looking at it and going, wow, it's not just about sport. A lot of what we're learning with sport, hopefully, is learning how to deal with and overcome and situations. And I think a lot of the athletes are learning that if we apply that to, hear a lot of the folks say how they're teaching their kids skills, how they're working with their relationship, how are you dealing with situations, working on together. Traffic when somebody is.
Mm-hmm.
And this is definitely one thing that has totally helped me from learning all this the last couple of years, and putting it in with the sporting events that I do. But it's changed my life as far as my everyday life and my physical life, from daily activities and relationships and everything. It's given me a more stable platform to base everything off of.
Yeah, I love to hear that, Greg. Like that's wonderful, and that's the intent of this type of training, right? To be able to improve your quality of life. And just like you were talking about, Patrick, skills like this, yeah, certainly they'll help with athletic performance, but they're life skills. They can help in all areas of our lives if we're starting to tune into them. And so the point also that I was getting after a bit here is, the more aware of this model that we are, of the thoughts that we have in certain events and in any given moment, we're going to have a lot of different heat of the moment thoughts. The more aware I am of that, I can choose to make some adjustments. And this can happen in the moment if I realize I'm not thinking productively. So I'm calling an audible in the moment. This can also happen as a way of pre-gaming going into an event. So we refer to this as more proactive ATC. So if I know that I have a big race coming up and I tend to get really nervous, high levels of anxiety, I want to reflect and ask myself, okay, what's an emotion that I want to have when I'm on the starting line? Maybe I want to feel calm, confident, focused. If I know that's the emotion that I have and my reaction, physically, I want to be engaged, but not too much. I don't want my heart rate skyrocketing. I want to be pretty even keeled, just ready to execute. If I know those are the consequences I want, I can pre-plan and I can ask myself, what's a heat of the moment thought? What thoughts can I have that are going to drive those emotions and reactions for me? So I'm being really intentional. I'm being deliberate with pre-planning my thinking. And when I do that in advance, it makes it that much more likely that I'll think that way in the moment. If we leave it up to chance, or we're only doing it and making those adjustments when an event or something stressful happens while we're performing, yeah, that can work. But if we're being more proactive with it, it makes it that much more likely that our headspace is going to be filled with productive thoughts versus leaving it up to chance. So we can use this skill to pre-plan the types of thoughts that we can have in the moment to drive more productive emotions and reactions. So maybe I want to pre-plan for myself, like, trust your training, right? Take this step by step. You know what you're doing. Whatever it is that's going to be productive for you. A thought that works for me might not work for everyone else on this call. So you've really got to think for yourself, what's a thought that's going to help get me into the zone that I need to be in emotionally, physically, to perform at my best. So you can certainly use this skill pre-planning your thinking, during, which we've already talked about quite a bit. And then you can also use the skill after as a means of reflection. So maybe an event doesn't go the way that you want it to, and you're not thrilled about how well you did. You're like, I didn't react the way I wanted to in that moment, for whatever reason. Afterwards, you can then reflect on that and ask yourself, okay, what thoughts was I having? Heck, in this session today, we're talking about activating events that you've already experienced. So you're already using the skill as a means of reflection. Now let's just attach it to your performances. So in that rowing example you gave, Patrick, maybe for that rower, they did go down the non-ideal path and their thoughts got the better of them. They can reflect on that. They can start to identify how those thoughts drove the consequences that weren't helpful for them. If they know that, they have that awareness, now we can begin to start making some changes, being more deliberate, being more intentional before going into those events in our lives. And with all of these skills, so this is just the tip of the iceberg in terms of the skills that we have to offer and can provide. But with these skills, we're training our brain. As I've mentioned before, we're creating new habits in thinking. We're creating new neural pathways in our brain. And I like to think of it as like a super highway in our brain. So by the time and I'm kind of going on a soapbox a little bit here, bear with me. So at the time we're 12 or 14 years old, around that time, a lot of our thought patterns become solidified. And this is through our experiences. It's a kind of a combination of nature and nurture, but our thought patterns become pretty solidified. And I think of that as like a super highway in our brain, right? And for a long time, we thought that that super highway was set and there was nothing we could do about it. We now know that's not the case. Neuroplasticity, our brain is flexible, it's malleable, it's able to make these changes. So if I see that super highway, that pattern in my thinking is not helpful for me, I can intentionally make a change. So maybe by using this ATC model, by pre-planning my thinking, maybe one day I choose to create a new path for myself in my brain, right? And that path is going to start out as more of a dirt road. And over time, the more I use that path, maybe now it's paved. And then long term, the goal is if I continue to nurture that new pathway, I can begin to shift from that super highway, a line of thinking that maybe wasn't productive for me, to a new way of thinking. And the more consistently I do that, over time, that new pathway can take over. And this is how new habits are formed, right? This is how big change in people's life can happen in the way they operate. So it absolutely is possible, no matter what age. It does become more difficult the older you get, but no matter what age, you can choose to make these changes in your thinking and create a new path for yourself. Did that make sense?
Wonderful.
Okay.
No, thank you. This is
yeah.
great. And I'm glad that we're capturing this, and we'll be able to refer back to this and share this with other teammates, other family members. This will be on the Warrior Care website. This will be super valuable, and it's definitely got me thinking from the coaching and the athlete side, Heather. So thank you for sparring some ideas.
Absolutely. And yeah, that was going to be my final thing. Are there any questions, final thoughts for me before we wrap this up? It's about that time. All right. If you do have any questions or anything, feel free to reach out. Patrick, you have my contact information. You can disseminate that as you see fit. But yeah, thank you so much for taking some time today, tuning in. I hope you're able to take some of this, and even if it's just beginning to become more aware of this relationship as you move throughout your life, the awareness can lead to change. Once you realize that sometimes thoughts aren't as productive as you'd like them to be, now you can do something with that information and you can regulate that. So yeah, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Heather. And on behalf of the Military Adaptive Sports Program and Magellan Federal, we're very happy to have you part of the team. We're very happy to have this presentation. And once again, everyone, you can find, I would give it about 6 or 7 days as we were editing and making them all great for content. They will be on the Warrior Care website, and you can find this chat. And if you, I can definitely put you in contact with Heather, and just reach out to me. Our email addresses are on Warrior Care. And once again, everyone, have a wonderful rest of the day or beginning of the day if you're on the other coast. And we appreciate you joining our coffee chat. And we're going to sign off now, and I will stay on for about 10 minutes if anybody has any questions. But thank you, Heather, for your presentation.
Of course. Thank you.
Thanks, Heather.
Yeah, you're very welcome.